Hi all, my name is László Leber. Today we will build a little React application which will use Axios, React-async, and we will use the Context API as well. Axios is a promise-based HTTP client for the browser and for Node.js. React-async is a React component and hook for declarative promise resolution and data fetching. You can use React-async with, for example, Axios or Fetch or GraphQL. So let's get started. You can download the starter project under my video. As you can see here, we have a little backend application named backend test for the front end, and we have the React application itself. Our backend is a little server application which uses Express. It is running on port 9000 and it has some routes, for example API/cars, which will return the cars JSON, which is a list of cars. We have some access control allow origin headers to allow the front end to get the data from the backend because they are running in different ports. The front end is running on port 3000. If you need some detailed information about this backend application, please watch my previous video, which is how to Dockerize a React application with Nginx proxy and with Node.js backend application, and you will see how it's built. In our frontend, we fetch the list of cars from the backend on port 9000 with URL API/cars. In the next steps, we will use React-async instead of fetch, and React-async will use a service which will be based on Axios. Okay, let's test our backend and frontend that can we run them or not. It seems that my project is okay, my frontend and backend is running because my frontend can fetch our car list. You can see here. Okay, now stop the applications and we will install Axios, and we should install React-async as well. After successful installation, let's create a new folder named API and create a provider.js file in it. In this file, we will create a service. First, we have a getLanguageHeaders function. In the future, here you will be able to read the language settings, for example, from your local storage and set the language in accept language header. The next function is encode_query_params, which transforms a map of parameters to separated URI encoded query string. The next function is replaceURL_params, which replaces parameters with values in the URL with URI encoding. The next one is process_param. It processes the parameters and producing the final form of them based on their type. And finally, in create service, we return our Axios object and we put the whole thing together. At the end of our file, we use the createService function to produce our services and put them in a services object. The next step is to create a service.js file. Here we import our createService function from the provider. Here we define a service config. Here you can see that we set up our getCars service. The URL is /cars because the root of our service is the localhost port 9000/API. So here we only have to use only the postfix of the URL, which is /cars. The method is get, and we don't need any authentication, so outs required property is false. At the end of the file, we use the createService function, we pass the service config to this function, and we create our services object, which will be used by, for example, the actions. Now let's create another folder named state and create a context.js file in it. In this file, we will create our contexts. So we will have two contexts, one for the car state and one for the car dispatch. So we will create two functions. One is the useCar state and the other one is the useCar dispatch. In both of these functions we have an error handling because we would like to be sure that they are used inside our car provider. Create our car provider, and here you can see that we use the useReducer hook to create our state and dispatch objects, and we use our state object as a value of our car state context, and we use our dispatch for the value for the car dispatch context. We export our state and dispatch and car provider from this file. Now let's create a new file named constant. Here we have a constant named getCars. We will use it in our action and in the reducer too. Now let's create the actions.js file. In this file we defined getCars function, which will return a promise. We use the services getCars function here. We will use this action function in our view component. So we will use this function in our React-async as a promise function. So in this function we call our services getCar, and after the data arrived, we dispatch our setCars function with the result data, and the setCars function is defined on an object. The type will be getCars from constants, and the payload will be the result data, and this data will be processed in our reducer, and the reducer will modify the state. Later you can use some progress bar and in the top of the getCars function, you can show the progress bar, and in the final block, for example, you can hide the progress bar. Okay, now let's create our reducer. The reducer will process the state and the action. It decides that which state modification should be done based on the actions type, and will modify the state with, for example, in the getCars, with the cars list. It will set the cars inside our state to the brand new payload. Okay, now let's create a new folder named view. We will have a car list file there. We will modify our app.js because in the app.js we will have only the provider, and we will use our car list component here and move this car list related codes into the car list.js file. Okay, import the useCar state and useCar dispatch from our context, and import the getCars function from our action, and import the useAsync from React-async. Then destructuring the cars object from our state object, and use the useCar dispatch to create our dispatch object. After that, we use the useAsync hook. We use our getCars function as promise.fn, and we pass in the dispatch. We define an isLoading variable with destructuring. The isLoading will be true until pending promise. After the promise finishes, then the isLoading will be false, and we return our cars list. In the app.js, import the car provider and the car list. We use the useCar state and the useCar dispatch in our car list, so we must put the car provider around it. Okay, now we can test our applications, that how can they work together. So let's start our backend with the node server.js command in the backend test folder, and use the npm start command in the root folder to start the front end. Sorry, we have some mistake here. Yes, and now you can see that my front end is running. It can get the list of cars from the backend. Finally, I will show you how can you parameterize the services. First, we will set up a query-based parameter. After that, we will set up a body-based parameter with post method, and after that we will set up an where-based parameter. Just for test, we pass value 15 as car ID to our service function, and in the browser we will see that which is the final form of our parameter which is produced by our convert param function in our service file. Okay, that's all for now today. Thanks for watching, and if you like my video, please subscribe. You will find some interesting content on this channel in the future as well. And you can check my previous videos, for example, about how to Dockerize React application and use Nginx in Docker container with Node.js backend and React frontend. So thank you very much. Bye all.